Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer here to share with you another one of my worst best tier list ranking videos. This time I'll be doing a tier list ranking of the Final Fantasy franchise, which just so happens to be my all-time favorite JRPG series of all time. Now, believe it or not, around this time last year, I actually did do a top 5 best and favorite Final Fantasy video for a Final Fantasy, going over my favorite 5 entries in the series. So I thought it would be cool to kind of revisit the franchise and do a complete ranking of the entire franchise, and we're going to be sticking mainly with just the primary 15 games. We know that Final Fantasy 16 is on the horizon and will be coming out soon, so let's go through the first 15 games, and I'll be placing them in terms of my personal taste and which ones I enjoy more than the others. Now, before I get into this particular ranking, I would just like to let you guys know that if you do happen to enjoy this video by the end, I would really appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up and make sure to press the subscribe button, because every subscription really does count. And before I get into this ranking, just don't take it personal, because I'm going to be saying a few things that might offend some people, so please don't take it personal. It is just my personal preference. But if we jump right into the overall ranking, as you can see, we have to get a few of them, or a couple of them, out of the way and just make a few statements right now. For one, I did not play either of the MMO Final Fantasy games, so I was unfortunately not able to play 11 or 14. Those are the only two I had just flat out could not have had a chance to play, because I don't really do MMOs, and there's that. And there's one that is just so awful that it isn't even worth ranking, and that is, of course, going to be Final Fantasy 13. I don't like calling it Final Fantasy 13. I prefer to call it Final Damnation 13, but it's not even going to be ranked. Most of these, for the most part, are pretty positive. However, there is going to be one entry on the bottom that I'll be sure to talk about at the end, so because I have a lot about to say about that game. So let's start off with just the games that, in my opinion, I think are okay. It's mainly based off the first number of Final Fantasy games. So I would put games like Final Fantasy I think is okay. I think Final Fantasy II was certainly an improvement over 1. And I certainly think that once you got to Final Fantasy III, that was certainly an improvement over that game. I think I could bunch up 1, 2, and 3 all together. Solid games. Very, very straightforward stories. Nothing too impressive in terms of mechanics. They did kind of switch it around a little bit to mix them up a little bit, but they're pretty straightforward. They kind of set the standard to how a typical Final Fantasy game should operate, and they're not that bad. I think even after all these years, and they've even made slight and upgraded versions of these games that I think some more people have had a chance to play. But I think that if you take them into their original state, I would just put them as just solid, okay JRPGs that really set the foundation of what Final Fantasy would eventually evolve into. Next, we get into some of them that I really really like. And that starts off with Final Fantasy IV. I think Cecil is without doubt one of the greatest protagonists in the entire series. I think his storyline really has a lot of heartfelt moments, and to see his progression from a Dark Knight and becoming a Paladin was really awesome. And it gets incredibly personal when family is thrown into a mix. So I thought that Final Fantasy IV had a really great beginning, and it very much kept the momentum going all the way into the end. And that is definitely going to be followed up by, let's see, where would I put? I think I put 12 in light, but I don't think I liked it as much as 4. I think the battle system was what just kind of threw me off a little bit. I mean, it was kind of as far as I can recall, it was like the first Final Fantasy game that actually had more of a faster paced action style, and I just don't think that we were quite there yet. It's kind of like the bridge between like a turn-based system with 10 and like a faster paced style than we have it with 15. So that's how I view it. But overall, I did think it was a. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna. Yeah, I'll put it in like. And then I'm going to follow that up with, I have to put 15. I think 15 for me is the game that, after the tragedy that was the 13 trilogy, that was the game that, for me, got it back on track. And as it stands right now, Final Fantasy, for the most part, is in a really good place. I don't like to talk about that so-called Final Fantasy VII remake, which I refuse to acknowledge. But if not acknowledging that game, I think Final Fantasy is pretty solid. I think that once you got all the extra episodes and you've played them all together and you've actually spent enough time to really progress through the game and spend several hours in it, I do think overall Final Fantasy 15 is a great Final Fantasy game. Not one of the all-time greats, but it definitely does do the franchise name justice, in my opinion. And I would follow that up with Final Fantasy V. I really, really enjoy this one a lot. I like how it has a small cast of characters, but it does a much better job in some cases than other entries in the series of giving enough time to develop each and every character. A lot of Final Fantasy games have sometimes trouble balancing its characters, and I don't think that Five has that issue. I think where it's weakest is that it does have a tendency to drag once you get to, I would say, like the last fourth of the game, when you actually have your characters go to the other world. It does have a tendency to drag a little bit, and so there's like a need to want to speed things up. And I can definitely say that while the story does drag by the end, I think the lead up to that point is really, really good. There's definitely some really badass moments, some memorable scenes, some great action. I absolutely love the job system. I would say that out of all of the games that use the job system, that is the one I like the most, simply because once you've mastered a certain job, you actually can keep that skill to that character permanently and then apply it to when they're using other jobs. And I don't think any of the other Final Fantasy games allow you to do that. So that's why, for me, Final Fantasy V is always remained an all-time great to me. And I would easily follow that up with a game that a lot of people have mixed feelings with, and I can understand why, but I personally do enjoy it more than others. And I'm going to have to put 8. I think 8 really does top off the series of games that I would put in the liked column. I really did dig 8. I think it has probably one of my favorite casts. I think out of all the Final Fantasy games, I think 8 has my third favorite overall party. I think Squall is dead tied, at least in my eyes, with Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII in terms of like my all-time favorite main protagonist character. And even though a lot of people, like, I've seen a lot of people really, really shit all over 8, and I can't understand why per se. But even though the story can be a little bit confusing in terms of the whole aspect of time and time travel and trying to tell a story that takes place at two different times and using different characters, I think it does a solid job at least connecting those two different storylines and actually using the aspect of time travel very, very effectively. And I absolutely adore the relationship between Squall and Renoa. I think that Renoa was very, very successful in trying to get Squall out of his, like, really hard shell, because Squall is kind of a bit of a boredom character and a bit of an ass at times, but she's able to pierce through his armor, and by the end he's a very, very cool character and made better for it. And so yeah, that's why, in my opinion, I really do enjoy Final Fantasy VIII, perhaps more than others. Now the last 3 games that we have to work with are just all-time favorite. Love these games, have loved them since I was a kid, and I will continue to do so till the day I die. But to top that off, I think without question, the greatest of the 16-bit Final Fantasy games has to go to Final Fantasy VI, the true 6. If you look at the box, it says 3, but that's a whole different dispute right there. But 6 is a great game. 6 is without question my all-time favorite Super Nintendo game overall, even more so than games like Super Mario World or Chrono Trigger and a few other classic Super Nintendo titles. But that is the all-time greatest. If you want to look at the pinnacle of 16-bit pre-3D Final Fantasy games, you cannot get any better than that. I think Kefka is without a question probably the most iconic, perhaps maybe second to Sephiroth, villain in Final Fantasy history. I think he's kind of the equivalent of what happens when you have Joker and Carnage have a man baby who's given the powers of a god. And just saying that sounds epic. I think the only downside that I could say 6 has is that it has too many characters. I think a sweet spot in terms of character numbers should be like 6 to 7, I would go. I think 7 is most of the amount of characters that I think you need to have in order to have a balanced party. But because 6 has so many characters, we never even get a chance to spend enough time with any of them. And some of them are just thrown away. In fact, you get characters so late, you'll pick up characters like literally right before the final battle. And so you're not given much time for them to make much of an impact. They're just kind of there to just pick up numbers. But in my opinion, that is the only flaw that Final Fantasy VI has. Everything else is great. The story is great. Most of the characters are great. The battle system is great. The animations are great. This game still holds up to this day. And it is just an instant classic in my opinion. Now this is easily followed up by probably the single most important video game that I've ever played, and that has to go to Final Fantasy VII. Now, many people consider 7 to be overrated. I understand where that comes from, but you have to understand that 7 really did revolutionize the JRPG genre in terms of giving it real mainstream viewership. It had no, as far as I can recall, no JRPG before 7 had ever had that much attention. And it's kind of, and so a lot of the popular RPGs that we have today would not have been, or would not have been able to get the attention that it did if it wasn't for 7. Now, yes, I understand that overall 7 can be a little bit basic at times. Some of the characters are kind of boring, and I think Cat Sif is just like one of the all-time great, worst Final Fantasy characters of all time. And I think the death of Eris is, it's considered to be one of the most iconic deaths in video game history, and I understand why. And I will admit that when I did first see this game, when I was 7 years old, it did make me cry. It doesn't do that anymore. But there's just no denying that for me personally, I have a serious personal connection with Final Fantasy VII because it really did put me on the journey of wanting to become the type of gamer that I have become to this day. I probably wouldn't be on YouTube or even be interested in gaming if it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII. It is that important to me, which is why I feel even more sad that, I just hate what the remake has done to that game. I just absolutely despise it, and it's so sad because Final Fantasy is just so polarizing. It has two different sets of all-time greats and all-time worst, and it's all in one franchise, and no other franchise in gaming history is that polarizing. And it started with 7, and I will continue to say this, that the 7, when people talk to me about 7, the only 7 I'm ever going to acknowledge is this one. This is the true Final Fantasy VII, not that bullshit remake that they're trying to resell and parade it like it's the real 7, when in my opinion it's not. But that's a rant for another day. And that leaves just really one more entry on the list, which I'm sure some of you guys have known if you watch my channel long enough, but that has to go to Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X is not only my all-time favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, it is my favorite JRPG game of all time, and it is a legendary 10 out of 10. I even would go so far as to say it is the only legendary 10 out of 10 game on this list. Any department, any aspect of any JRPG you can think of, this game has the best in above any other Final Fantasy game that I've ever played. There's not a single aspect of this game that I could look at another game and say that I would pick it in this game over 10. It has by far my favorite cast of characters, my favorite combat system, my favorite soundtrack, my favorite art direction, my favorite ending, my favorite set of summonings, just favorite villains. It's all here. It is all in one package, and it's been that way, and it's hard to imagine that this game came out in 2001. This game has been out for 20 years, and I have yet to play an RPG that has managed to eclipse it. I think the closest we've had is Persona 5 Royal, but in terms of all the other Final Fantasy games, this one stands above all of them without question. Now, in closing, there's one more game that I feel like I need to talk about, otherwise people are going to ask me why I haven't talked about this game, and that is Final Fantasy IX. Now, I got to put this in a tier, in a spot by itself, and unfortunately, Final Fantasy IX is simply forgettable. It's not even worthy of a color. I don't know what it is about 9, but there's nothing about 9 that I find appealing. There is nothing about it that is memorable or stands out or I find impressive in any direction. And it's even worse by the fact that this is a game that, in my opinion, I didn't even know had fans until a number of years ago. Like, this was, to me, when you look at the long lineup of Final Fantasy games, there's just something off about 9 that just feels so out of place. Like, 9 came out at the wrong time. Like, I think 9 would have been better if it had come out, like, before 7 or somewhere between 1 and 5. I just think that that's where that game belongs. Because the only thing that stands out to me about 9 is that it's like the first game in like a while when this game came out that kind of went back to the focus on crystals, which they hadn't done since I want to say 5. 5 had a big focus on crystals, so yeah, that's why I feel like 9 belongs there. And on top of that, there's just nothing about it that works. Like its story is like, I don't even know what the story was. Your characters, I don't even know who your characters are. Like literally, the only things I can remember about 9 is that it has 3 characters that I generally like, and and what's worse is that I spent a month and a half studying this game, researching this game for 2 specific videos, and going back and watching those videos, even I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, I researched this game, I scripted these videos, I voice recorded them, and even going back and watching them, I don't even understand what I am saying. In fact, this game is so forgettable that the guy who, the only reason I even own a copy of Final Fantasy IX is because the retro store man who was selling me, I was looking for a copy, an original copy of Final Fantasies VIII and VII, and he did have a copy of them, but he only was selling them in a pack of 3. So he was only selling them if you bought all 3 of them, and I felt so off about 9 that I actually offered to pay the man an extra, I want to say $20 or $30 more to take 9 out, just so I could buy 7 and 8, because those are the 2 games I really wanted. And the reason he did that is because he could not get rid of this game. The only way he could sell this game was to pack it with these other 2 games. I mean, that says a lot. And I'm very confused because I know 9 has fans, but I don't know why. And I just don't understand why. It's just so weird. 9 is just so bizarre. I mean, I either love you or I don't like you. And trust me, I hate 13, but at least I have reasons not to like 13. But everything else I generally like. But there is just nothing about 9 that is appealing. And I challenge anyone to try to convince me why this game is any good. Really, like, try to convince me. Like, change my mind. I dare someone to try to convince me why 9 is any it's worthy of the Final Fantasy name. I really do. But heck, that's beside the point. So that is my ranking of the primary set of Final Fantasy games. If you could do your own personal ranking of the Final Fantasy games going from 1 to 15, how would you rank them? Share your own ranking in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.